Most of you here today are familiar with the very talented founding directors of the Institute, Robin Speculad and Antonio Nieto-Rodriguez. But it would be remiss of me not to highlight some of their outstanding achievements, for it is because of them and because of the fantastic work that they do that we are here and we can reap the benefits as well. So let me tell you just a little and the rest will unfold. As a global pioneer and expert in strategy implementation, Robin is relentless in his pursuit of excellence, always driven to transform strategy and innovation to the highest degree. His energy, his passion is evident in his huge body of work, his authorship and scholarship in leading journals and books. And for those who have heard him speak and know of him, you know of his global impact and the impact of his training and presentations, especially around the models of transformation and benchmarking. And if that doesn't convince you he's a man on a mission, you should see his focus as a die-hard Ironman athlete. Well, I'm exhausted just thinking about the work that he puts through and the energy that he has. And the beautiful synergy that he has with his partner, Antonio Nieto-Rodriguez, the very talented individual who is indeed a leading expert in project management and strategy implementation, is really a perfect blend. Antonio is recognised by Thinkers 50 with the prestigious award, Ideas into Practice. He is the author of Leading Successful Projects, The Project Revolution, and The Focused Organisation, and currently writing the HBR Project Management Handbook. Antonio not only writes about project management, but he teaches it to senior executives at leading universities and business schools, where he faces real-time, real-life leaders who pull no punches, I'm sure, when it comes to asking hard questions, and he supplies the hard ways to find the best answers. He may not do the Ironman athletics, but to my mind, his marathon career in teaching skills and expertise also leaves me breathless. Robin and Antonio, we'd love to hear you just say hello to everybody. Robin, I hope you've got your sound up now. Let's hear a few words from you, and then Antonio, over to you.
Okay, I'll jump in first, Ricky. I think Robin is still struggling with the voice and the sound. So thank you for the kind introduction. Thank you everybody for being here. It's a special moment. We've seen a dream coming true with this event. Robin and I met, I think, 5 years ago, speaking in an event, and we connected. But there's a need for bringing something else to the professionals, to upgrade them, to bring them more strategic thinking, more strategic tools for better their implementations. And we started the journey, which today is a key milestone for us. And we're very proud to see Rita today with us. If there's a thinker in the world who sees strategy better than no one, is Rita. And she's just not only on the thinking, but as a person, amazing, generous, and very kind. So it's just a pleasure to hear her talking and sharing. And so we thought who could be the best speaker to start our keynote, and we came to ask Rita, which is part of our advisory board. I want to thank, on behalf of Robin and myself, our partners as well, APMG, advisors, which have been supporting us very strongly for the first year that we started launching the online course and the certification. We're building that as we speak. And what I wanted to thank especially on our behalf is you. I think the community that we're building, this should be a community that helps each other, that we want to, of course, get to know each other a bit more. We thought that the format that we put in place is a bit different so that we can connect. We can bring people like Rita closer to us so that we can learn from her, but also together there's so much knowledge that today we can leverage much easier than in the past through these platforms and this event, that we want to make you part of this movement. And together do a better world. I think it can be personal, it can be for your business, it can be for the world. I think there is a need for doing better implementation. If you look at the statistics are appalling, 70%, 60% of strategies fail. So you just imagine if we do just half of that better, it's just we will be generating so much value and impact for society. So I think we are here in a quest as well to do things better, to create more value for everyone, for companies, for societies.
Ladies and gentlemen, now is the time you can sharpen your pencil or your fingertips to take notes and get your questions ready as I introduce Professor Rita Gunther-McGrath, best-selling author, fascinating speaker, and a longtime professor at Columbia Business School. She's one of the world's experts on innovation and growth and one of the most regularly published authors in the Harvard Business Review, truly earning the right to be ranked among the top 10 management thinkers in the world, as well as being #1 for strategy by Thinkers 50. Her best-selling books include The End of Competitive Advantage and Seeing Around the Corners, How to Spot the Inflection Points in Business Before They Happen. Over the next 40 minutes, Rita's going to give you the inside scoop on how to design a set of practices for highly uncertain times and fast-changing circumstances. And boy, aren't we in those right now. And she's going to help you create a new strategy playbook. So please settle into the best seat in the house, enjoy her presentation, and know you couldn't be in a better place right now. At the conclusion of her presentation, Robin is going to facilitate a 20-minute Q&A. So keep those questions coming once again in the chat line. And then we will take you after that into a breakout groups of about 6 to 8 people to discuss the key learnings, the takeaway things that you've gleaned from Rita's presentation, because that's certainly going to be a most challenging and worthwhile time for everybody today. So it is my greatest of pleasure and real privilege to introduce Professor Rita McGrath. Thank you very much. You're muted. That's right.
Thank you so much, Ricky. It's a real pleasure to be here. So I'll keep my comments fairly brief, and then we'll have plenty of time for interaction, which I know is what the objective really is. So let me share with you Zoom screen, this screen. Hopefully you can all see this. Everyone can see this? Yeah, we're good. Okay, so I wanted to start with the evolution of the field of strategy. And when I first started in the world of strategy, it really had inherited a tremendous legacy from what was called industrial organization economics. And the presumption was that you were operating in an industry that existed with markets and transactions that were already established, and that you had reliable sort of boundaries of the industry to look at, and that the objective, the goal, was to create this beautiful thing called a sustainable competitive advantage. And so if you think about it, the idea was really about just keeping operations going, and you enjoyed this advantage for a really long time. And in my own work and in my own research, what I've realized is that that model for strategy doesn't work for an awful lot of parts of the economy. And instead what you got is a concept that I call transient or temporary advantage, where you are experiencing the entire life cycle of a competitive advantage as your activities unfold. So there's the innovation and growth process, which is the beginning stage of a competitive advantage. There's the period of exploitation where you get to enjoy the fruits of your labor. And then there's the period of erosion where an advantage goes away, and the implementer's job at that stage is to extract resources from it so that you can fund the next generation advantage. And so this slide really illustrates that concept. This is a slide which shows market share shifts in the gaming business. And in the beginning, as you see, we had arcade games, and that's all there was. You had to go to a physical place and throw money at this refrigerator-sized machine. And the machine and the game were analog, right? They were built together. So they were incredibly expensive. There were only something like 42 games in the entire world because they were so complex and expensive to build. And so the next big revolution was, well, we now separated out the software from the hardware. So you could have games to play on, devices at home. Wow, that was much better. You started to see experimentation with form factors. You saw little games that you could take with you, like the Game Boy. You saw games that were sold on shrink wrapped software, right? You had games on CDs. You started to see different formats of games. So instead of just violent games, you had games, like The Sims or Civilization, where they were sort of more immersive. And of course, today we have games played in virtual reality. We have games played on phones. We have games played, in the internet. You have games in many different things. And what I want to draw your attention to here is the pattern. The pattern. Innovation creates a new advantage. You get to exploit that advantage for a while. Erosion makes the advantage go away or become less relevant. And if, I argue, the environment that you are operating in as an organization, it looks like this, then inside your organization, at the implementation stage, you have to look like this too. You have to be able to continuously innovate. You have to be able to exploit when the time is right. And you have to be able to exit and let go of advantages that have eroded when the time has come. And so that's the setting for what I call the new strategy playbook. And the new strategy playbook really has 6 planks, if you will. The first is that we have to get much more comfortable with change and continuous change. So rather than stability being seen as the normal thing, change is actually the normal thing. And today it's very popular to talk about this in terms of agility. I called it continuous reconfiguration, which is kind of a mouthful. So agility works for me. We have to get better at disengagement, which is when an advantage is going away, we have to get better at pulling resources out of it to fund the next generation advantage. We have to figure out how to get our best resources against our best opportunities. And that's really hard because what happens in companies is resources get trapped. They get held hostage by powerful divisions or business leaders or lines of business, and they don't deliver to the future that we would really like them to. Innovation. Today, in most companies, the state of innovation is pretty poor. It's episodic, it's rare, it's innovation theater, right? We send everyone off to worship in Silicon Valley and they all learn about, let's go by what Google does. Let's do what Google does. And instead, what I'm going to argue is you need to build innovation as an actual proficiency, something that doesn't require one person or a heroic effort or an every now and again, all out call to actually happen. So building innovation as a proficiency, I think, is really key. Leaders need to be more what I call discovery driven. And what that means is open to new information, not this sort of heroic leader on a horse sort of charging into battle, but much more a connector of a web of communication, someone who gets the information, thinks about it really seriously. And it doesn't abrogate your need to lead and to make decisions, but it does put a much higher emphasis on the need to gather information and make decisions. And finally, this all has huge implications for how we manage our careers. Increasingly, we're in a world of what I call the tour of duty career, where you sign up for something that may last for a period of time, but then you move on. And you're going to move on to something else, something that's different, something that may or may not be with the same organization that you started it. So one of the interesting things we've seen now is people will join a company, leave that company, come back to that company multiple times in their careers, and that's now become much more normal. So we're operating with an entirely new form of strategy in terms of the concepts that we believe are important. Oops, I didn't want that. So my latest book is called Seeing Around Corners, and it has to do with strategic inflection points. And right now, of course, we're in the mother of all strategic inflection points. So I no longer need to make the case that this is important, which is, it saves a lot of time. But let's just take a minute to understand what a strategic inflection point is, why we so often miss them, what that means for implementation. So I define a strategic inflection point, building on Andy Grove's wonderful work of many years ago, that it exerts a 10x pressure on your business. In other words, it changes something about your business in an order of magnitude kind of way. Now, why do so many sensible organizations miss inflection points? Well, you know, the thing is, any business is born at a particular point in time. And some things are possible and some things are not. And over time, you develop this recipe for success. And so your recipe for success flows into everything else that you do. It flows into your key performance indicators. It flows into your institutional arrangement. It flows into your regulations. It flows into the way that you see the world. And that world becomes very blinkered by what are the conditions for success. So I'd like to take an example just to illustrate what this looks like. And the example I'll use is the case of men's shaving. Now, I haven't had a chance to look at you all, but my guess is there are various degrees of commitment to this process, especially since we're all in lockdown. But men's shaving, and of course, the dominant player in men's shaving for many, many years was Gillette, bought by Procter & Gamble in 2005 for $57 billion. Gillette is a powerhouse in the world of men's shaving, 70% market share, a competitive advantage that went on for years, held up by experts like Roger Martin as the dominant strategic player in that sector. So their business model looked like this. We invest in R&D that allows us to create better products, that allows us to use our size and scale to get those products into retail outlets. And underlying the entire thing is hundreds of millions of dollars of mass market advertising and branding. And that was the model that lasted forever. I mean, it was, 70 years since King Gillette himself invented the safety razor so men could shave at home. Okay, so let's look at innovation in that space. Well, I'll start in 1990 because that's when I first really studied the company with the launch of something they came to call the sensor razor. And this was when someone from R&D said, hey, we could put 2 blades on a stem, and that will allow us to produce a better shave, and men will pay more for that. And so they decided to go for it. They launched globally. This was literally a Harvard Business School case. It's called Gillette, the launch of the sensor. And they had the best cartoon advertising this thing. It was great. So the first blade would kind of come along and pick the hair up from your face. The second blade would come along and slice it off. And this was amazing. This was great. And they settled in to enjoy this advantage for probably the better part of the next decade. And then it came time for the next innovation. And you can imagine what that was. 3 blades on a stem. This was going to be great. And the imagery around that was, they called the thing the Mach 3. And in keeping with that name, if you were cool enough to buy a Mach 3, gentlemen, you were cool enough to sit in the cockpit of a fighter jet. I mean, whoa, this is amazing. And, they had settled in and they thought, this is great. We've launched this. We'll get another decade out of this. And then strategy disaster strikes. Schick comes to market with the world's first 4-bladed razor. You can only imagine the consternation in Gillette headquarters. I mean, you have been training consumers for decades now. 2 blades better than 1, you should pay more. 3 blades better than 2, you should pay more. And now a competitor has the world's first 4-bladed razor? I mean, shocking, right? Terrible. Well, so what do you do? So they called out all the lawyers. They sued everybody like crazy in patent court. They stopped Schick, they stopped Schick's advance, and they rushed to market with the world's first 5-bladed razor, the Fusion. So you can see where this is going. But my point here is this is the strategy lens that was gearing up. Horn beeping. Maybe whoever's got the horn beeping should mute. Anyway, so meanwhile, and here what I'm going to talk about is the inflection point that this whole agglomeration of communication and information technologies is made possible. This guy, Mike Dubin, who's a failed entrepreneur, he was not accepted to Columbia Business School. He was sort of bumming around trying to figure out what to do with himself. And he runs into a buddy at a party sponsored by his dad, and they get to talking about shaving because this buddy had managed to secure a shipment of decent not great, but decent razors from South Korea. And he was sort of chatting about what do you do about them. Well, anyway, as the evening wears on, the conversation turns to the negatives in the Gillette model. And there are many, right? The blades are expensive, that's by design. The hassle of having to go to a store, and these razors are also catnip for shoplifters, right? So they lock them up in a razor fortress. So you have to get somebody to unlock the key and so finally out of this conversation, out of this concept, comes the idea of what came to be called the Dollar Shave Club. And this was back in 2010, sort of 2010, 2011 timeframe. And what you have to remember is up to then, the idea of going direct to consumer was a relatively small segment of the retail economy. There were always direct to consumer companies, so companies like Land's End or Bean or others. There, I mean, they've always existed. Sears was the original direct to consumer company, but that this would be an outlet for a mass market hadn't really become the norm at that stage. And so Dollar Shave was one of the very first ones. And so they said, hey, why go to a store? We'll ship you your razors. We'll send you as many as you want once a month. They're not going to be expensive. To launch the company, they used Amazon Web Services for their software. They used YouTube to market. They spent about, I think it was $35,000 to make this absolutely hilarious sort of 2-minute video in which they announced, we are Dollar Shave Club, shave time, shave money. They recruited brand ambassadors on Facebook. In other words, this agglomeration of communication and digital technologies meant that literally 2 guys in a garage could take on Gillette. I mean, this was unheard of in time. And the results, as we know now, are pretty devastating for Gillette. They missed it. They did not see that there was so much unhappiness with their existing model among certain consumer segments, and their market share in the U.S. came tumbling down. And of course, once Dollar Shave Club had demonstrated this was possible, all the others piled in. So you had Harry's and all these other people getting into the shaving business because there were such great margins in it. And I think that's an interesting illustration of an inflection point arriving, not seeing it, it moves through, and on you go. So let's talk now about implementation. I very specifically want to focus on a couple of things that are often overlooked. And the first thing is that the data that we use to make strategic decisions when we're in implementation mode really falls into 3 categories. The first kind of data are lagging indicators. And lagging indicators are the most common because they're the easiest, right? They're information about something that's already happened. So most financial reports, most operations information, it's great information, but it's about something that's already passed. You can't change it. Then we have current indicators. These tell you what's going on right now. What's happening around me. So data like employee engagement, net promoter scores, those things are all kind of current. Hardest thing to get are leading indicators. And here's where I would put the challenge squarely on this community, which is how do you develop an implementation process that gets people focused on leading indicators rather than lagging ones? And I think it's one of the great challenges for our time in business, because so much of what's wrong with business, the short-termism, the excessive focus on shareholders, the this, the that, the other, really has to do with the fact that we struggle with leading indicators. And so the easy thing to do that a lot of leaders unfortunately fall back on is we look at the quarter or we look at the current period, and we don't really think about the longer term, the leading indicators. And I would argue that the leaders that are my role models, the leaders that I look up to, have really looked at leading indicators. So here's an example from Microsoft, which has engineered an incredible turnaround under the leadership of Satya Nadella. And Nadella has said, look, we're going from a world of shrink-wrapped software where dominance in the category is the predictor for success to a world of on-demand in the cloud software where usage is what we need and people can walk away from us anytime they want. And so before we can get usage, we have to have customers loving us. And so, there's Nadella talking about empathy, talking about customer love. I mean, astonishing. And he's used this focus on leading indicators as one of the tools in his toolkit for really turning the company around. And I think it's been a remarkable transition, remarkable transformation. So let's move squarely on to implementation now. And I like to think about strategic implementation, strategic alignment, like flying a kite, like a child's kite, right? And what I love about the metaphor of the kite is you can't force a kite to fly. You have to build it right. You have to get it into the right conditions, and you have to lead it appropriately, right? It's got to be in balance. You can yell at it, you can stomp your feet, you can, do whatever you like, but if it's not in balance and if it's not in the right conditions, it's not going to be able to do very much for you. So the first point that so I'm hearing some
Bon, ça dépend, tu vas arriver à quelle heure? Si on arrive avant 13h, c'est bon?
I think
Ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you to mute your mic to respect the speaker, please? Thank you.
Anyway, so what you find with leaders is they tend to focus on one lever for implementation success. So some people are all about the scorecards or the metrics, or if we just the structure, right, if we just organize the boxes and lines, everything will be fine. And what I'm going to argue is each of these things are important, but they need to be in alignment. They need to be built to work together. So this is one of the big reasons why best practices, for example, fail. Best practices fail because you take, say, something that Google does, or something that Amazon does, or something that Facebook does, and you try to import it into your organization. And it's like, you bring a lever into a kite, which isn't built to accept it, and it just doesn't work. So you need to build a coherent, well-aligned entity. And the elements are, and we can talk about this in the Q&A, the first thing I look for is agenda. And I mean this incredibly literally. When you get together with people, what is on your agenda? And I'm going to argue if whatever it is that's important that you want to drive implementation around, that needs to be item 1, 2, or 3. And every meeting agenda, absolutely relentlessly get people focused. And it never fails to astonish me how people will just wander off into their own worlds if you don't regularly bring them in and say, this is the priority, these are the goals, this doesn't change. I have it with my own team just the other day. I put out the goals for the year and they're tinkering with them. And I'm like, no, no, those haven't changed from last week to this week. So agenda, what's on your agenda? Then you have to think about norms. That's organizational culture. And what you'll find is there are some norms that are just higher performing than others. So take the consultancy Accenture, just as an example. I mean, to me, they're a really good example of a company that has very high norms of performance. If you say you're going to get something done by Thursday, pretty much it's going to get done. This was illustrated to me by our own son, who joined Accenture after graduating from his undergraduate program. And he was home, as it were, for the weekend, and we were about to go out to dinner, and I had my coat on, and I'm like, look, let's go. And he says, oh, no, it's the last day of the month, and I need to get my time and expense reports in. And I'm like, oh, surely that can wait till tomorrow. And he looks at me in absolute horror, and he says, no, Mom, there can be floods, there can be earthquakes, I could have the bubonic plague, but time and expense reports get in on time. To myself, my God, this company is done in what 24 years of motherhood was never able to accomplish. It was amazing. But high performing norms where you get stuff done. Then you have news, which you can think of as the whole process of communication. So getting data, telling a story about it, communicating it to the organization. How does that happen? In between, in the middle of the kite, kind of the structure, is your talent. And how are you getting people? How are you deploying them? Are you putting the best people against the best opportunities? And that whole sort of infrastructure of how people are working together. Then you have allocations, really important. This is your resources, right? What are you rewarding? What are you allocating budget to? What are you giving priority to in your resources, your time, your talent, your money? You can think of the tail of your kite as your history. And I think this is quite interesting for established organizations because, what happens to a kite with no tail? It flies all over the place. A kite whose tail is too big and heavy, it's weighed down. And so I think there's this very interesting balance we need to have between, how much of this history do we keep with us and how much do we let go? Finally, leadership. And you can think of leadership like holding the string of the kite. And the reason I think that's an interesting metaphor is you can't just jerk it. It'll send the kite into all kinds of unpredictable places, and you can't just let it go and do its own thing. It'll wander off into the atmosphere. So leadership is really that subtlety of guiding the kite to where you need it to go. So those are some elements of what I look for when I'm looking for strategy implementation. So let me conclude with a couple of thoughts, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So the first thing I would observe is in my career, certainly we've seen strategy and innovation becoming much more integrated. And the reason for that is, I believe that as advantages become more transient, that we need innovation more frequently. You know, it used to be you could kind of do an innovation once a decade, like Gillette did historically, and you were set, right? Today, it needs to be much more of an ongoing proficiency, an ongoing process. And today, we're also seeing that digital is infusing just about every aspect of implementation and every aspect of strategy. So we need to get smarter about digital. So some key points to take away with you. I believe firmly that many parts of our global economy are really in this transient advantage context where we need to get smarter about all the phases of a competitive advantage, not just the exploitation phase. I think entry barriers are coming down, so advantages are eroding more and more quickly. I think, experience that. Most of the data we work with is lagging. I would encourage you in your work on implementation to try to address that. Leading indicators, as we found at Microsoft, get people focused on the future. And that's what you want. You want them thinking about not just the quarter, you want them thinking about the next year and the year after that. I don't think seeing around corners is about predicting what's happening. So a specific—
I was about to scan something. I received 2 comments from Peter. So first one on the risk, he's asking, this date passed, right?
Yeah,
But he didn't check the—
revised strategy to
Please switch your phone to mute.
Okay.
I
Gentlemen,
just removed this,
Okay.
or I will remove it.
Yeah, QF
Hey,
revised
Robin,
strategy
you
to
can
tender
mute them
and select
yourself.
bidders.
You are the host,
Tender
Robin. You can
presentation
mute
review
them.
technical and commercial
yeah,
proposals.
I've actually made Rita the host, so our apologies for that.
The contract within 3 months.
So
Anyway,
it was supposed on the 15th of Jan.
yeah.
It was pushed
Yes,
3
it's
months, right?
Pushed back, and now the
Let's
new
do it
date, just
straight here.
information here following this.
Very distracting. Can you mute your mics, please?
Apologies.
Anyway, the lasting point I would make is that to make change last, you really need to think about this critical problem of alignment and how you bring all those elements into focus. So to learn more about me, here's just a page with all my contact information. You'll find me on all the usual places, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube. I do a monthly series of fireside chats. I mean, a weekly series of fireside chats with people I just think are really super interesting. And I do a monthly newsletter, which is free and you can subscribe right on my website, ritamcgrath.com. So let me stop there and I will turn it back over to our hosts.
Rita, that was wonderful. Thank you.
Great.
I think last time you and I met, just to recall, was breakfast in New York.
It was at Hudson Yards, which is like a ghost town these days.
But good evening from Singapore, and our apologies to all the participants about the noise that came through, and especially to Rita, our apologies for the disruption. You are the true professional as always.
Thank you.
And your comments on the kite, let me just remind you also, it's part of our course. It is one of our articles, so you contributed that, so thank you. And as always, you've given a wonderful presentation, and there's a few things, there's some questions coming in, and if you don't mind, we'd just like to shoot a few questions at you.
Sure.
The first one is that, you know, you started off talking about the erosion that is going on, and you know, we all know that companies' life cycles are becoming shorter and shorter. Are there any key indicators that you would highlight that people should be aware of that would suggest they're moving towards erosion? Are there any alarm bells or alarm signals you would highlight?
Absolutely. So in my book, The End of Competitive Advantage, I actually have a checklist that you can use. So we're investing the same amount, but we're not getting back the same in return. Customers are telling us that a competitive offer that's cheaper is good enough. We're not able to attract key talent. We are missing, the opportunity to get into the next big inflection point. We've missed one or more. People that we want to keep are leaving, and so forth and so forth. So you can begin to see how that's eroding. One new indicator that we've come up, and this is for publicly traded companies, is something that we're calling the imagination premium. And not to bore you with the methodology, but basically you can break apart the value of a publicly traded company in the imputed value from operations versus the value from growth. And what our research has suggested is that if investors believe that your growth story is a solid one and that you can execute against it, they will actually bid up the price of your stock to a higher level because you got this quality of imagination. That's what we call it. And we just recently did a case study of Coca-Cola. And of course, Coca-Cola had a legendary CEO, Mukhtar Kent, starting in 2008, which was a terrible time to take over a fizzy drinks company. And he did a lot of restructuring, and it was just a lot of hard slog for many years. But what you found was their value of operations at that point was the bulk of their market cap. And as Kent moved through his transformation, and as the new CEO has taken over, what you've seen is investors are now saying, oh, wow, Coke's got a great growth story. Today, their imagination premium, which is the value of operations divided by the value of growth, is about 4. And what that means is the bulk of their market cap is actually a function of the estimates that they're going to grow. So it's a fascinating story.
And how much is that correlation related to the innovation that you were also?
Yes. Well, for example, the kinds of things they've been doing is they bought Costa Coffee, which got them into the hot drinks, local beverages, and so forth area. And investors are basically saying, yeah, fizzy drinks may not be the future, but back when we can finally get out again, that people are going to be very interested in these sort of local experiences that Coke can now tap into.
Okay, thank you. And of course, seeing around corners, your most recent book was wonderful and packed not only with the fascinating research around the inflection point, but also the number of examples and stories that you gave. And you highlighted in your presentation the Gillette. Just curious, have you done an update? Do we know how Gillette's doing over the last couple of years?
Well, they're struggling. They're struggling. They've done a lot of what you would expect, right? So they've got the Gillette Shave Club now, and they've got innovations around things like you can design your own razor, you can design your own stem. They've got maker conferences where people can go and they're still a very formidable company. Going from 70% to 59% market share. That's not doom and destruction. It's just a little less headroom than they used to have. So I think the other big thing that they're wrestling with right now is with the pandemic. Like, what are men not doing? They're not, they're not doing men's grooming and putting on ties and going off to work. They're at home in their sweatpants. So that, of course, has had a depressing effect on demand for a lot of their men's grooming products. So I think they've basically right-sized and are trying to prepare themselves for what happens next, which I think they speculate will be kind of an increase in demand as we all get back to, looking professional again in some way, shape, or form.
Okay. One of the interesting questions picked up on your leading and your lagging indicators model. And one of the interesting things is looking today using prescriptive analytics, because we all know leading indicators are the hardest to capture. Have you been able to do any comparison of how now we can, between leading indicators and prescriptive analytics?
Sure. So a couple of things to be very careful about, and I'm sure you'll be discussing this over the course of your conference. AI is only as good as the data sets it is trained on. And the available data is often incredibly biased. So just as one example, Carola Criado Perez wrote a wonderful book called Invisible Women. And the book is, it's this thick. I have it on my shelf actually over there. And what it goes through chapter by chapter is how so many of our systems in society basically ignore the fact that half the population is female. And what ends up happening is, life-threatening consequences that occur. And so I think you've got to really be very, very careful about over-indexing on what the machine is telling you. So I think that's one. The other book I can highly recommend when you're thinking about this, and actually Tim Harford was one of my fireside guests, it's called The Data Detective. just came out in the US. It's got a different title in the UK and probably Australia. But he goes through, so he's the BBC's undercover economist. And what this book is about is don't let the stories about data fog your analysis of what the data are really telling you. And what makes a good headline is often not what is really the truth.
Please go on, Rita, please go on.
It's often not really the truth. And so I think it's really valuable to understand the mechanics of how you can get smarter about using data.
Okay, thank you. If you don't mind, just a couple more questions, if we can steal a few more of your time. This one, Sunny, thank you for this. He's curious, as many of us are, as hopefully optimistically this year we start to come out of the pandemic. What are you seeing from where you're sitting in terms of evolution of strategy implementation and your thoughts for the year ahead, specifically to companies implementing their strategy? What are your thoughts?
I don't think it's changed. The pandemic is one of the factors that is to be taken into account as you're thinking about the economy and about what your particular company's situation is. I think what is often overlooked is that the pandemic has produced winners and losers. That there are companies that are doing better than they ever dreamed. One of my clients is Benjamin Moore, which is a paint company here in the U.S. They can't keep the product on the shelves. You can't keep housing construction products in stock. So there's incredible, but and this is the risky part, temporary, I suspect, demand being created on the part of all those people who have money and they're at home. Of course, there's incredible devastation for people that have lost their jobs or lost their source of livelihood. And then there's, the huge group sort of in the middle sort of saying, well, we've adjusted and adapted, and now we're cautiously moving into what the next thing is. With respect to returning to a world in which we all feel comfortable in the presence of strangers, I think it's going to be a very rocky road back. And the reason I think that is because there's so many headwinds against population-wide adoption. And this is really, if you want to look at strategy implementation, right? The whole reaction on the part of governments to the pandemic has produced, the complete spectrum of outcomes, from very competent and well handled on the one dimension to just, what were they thinking, complete disaster on the other. And so I think there'll be textbooks written for years comparing how different jurisdictions responded. My own fear is that we're going to have little pockets of this flaring up for a long time to come. And so, let's say you've got a conference in Singapore and there's a sudden flare up in Singapore and everybody sort of says, oh, well, not a safe place to go. So I think if you're in the event business or in the business of requiring people to meet face to face, it's going to be a pretty iffy thing for quite a while, I believe.
And if I can just add on that our closing keynote is going to be Marvin Tan, who's the Senior VP at Singapore Airlines. And Marvin highlighted to me that they're predicting that they won't get back to pre-COVID travel until at least 2025. So in full agreement with you.
Yeah.
A couple more questions, if you don't mind. I think Moez has definitely read your books, because the way he's framed the question. So thank you for that, Moez. How would you explain companies protecting its competitive advantage by creating some moats against its products or technologies before it gets copied by by the competition when its IP has elapsed?
Oh, well, that's classic strategy 101, right? That goes all the way back to the large industrial organizations on which the industrial age economists cut their teeth. And the idea was you found a protected position in a protected industry and you threw up entry barriers like crazy and tried to keep others from entering. And so that's pretty classic maneuver. And you see it today when pharmaceutical companies have a drug that goes off patent, they try to surround it with other things that can keep the competitors from easily copying, or they just throw in the towel and it goes into their over-the-counter kind of portfolios. So it's a very common concept in strategy. Where I think there's a really interesting couple of books that I would recommend. One is called The Innovation Stack. It's by Jim McKelvey, who's one of the co-founders of Square, which is basically the company that teaches your cell phone to be a credit card. And what he argues, and the people at Apple would argue this as well, is that a lot of times your competitive differentiation is not the process of some grand strategy. It's making these idiosyncratic and unique decisions as you're solving thorny implementation problems that makes what you're doing so hard to copy. And just as an example, at Square, Amazon went after that business. They had a business they called Neighborhood Register. They had their own card reader, and they tried and tried and tried to catch Square in that market, and they couldn't do it. And eventually they exited that, Amazon exited that business and sent all of the customers that had signed up for their product a Square reader and encouraged them to go use Square. I mean, fascinating, right? I mean, here's a company with the deepest pockets on the planet, certainly knows how to innovate, very well managed and funded, and they could not catch this scrappy little upstart because of those idiosyncratic small decisions Square had made about serving its customers better than anybody.
Rita, thank you. I think Tom's got a lovely closing question, so thank you, Tom. Does your new strategy playbook always need a transformation program to get it started and change the organization, or can it be realized in the normal, traditional way we're operating?
So I am not a huge admirer of massive announced big, flag waving transformation programs. I'm a huge admirer of ambitious vision executed incrementally. So I have an article that came out last summer about digital transformation, and in which I argue the best way to encounter real disruption is not by disrupting your company, it's by taking systematic steps to improve across a vector of different activities. And a great example of this is the German metals manufacturing company called Klockner, which, they started off their digital transformation, which has now been fundamental. I mean, they've created a platform for themselves, they've created a platform for the industry, they've digitized an entire sector, but they started off with automating faxes. If we could just digitize the faxes, at least that would be a start. And then they proceeded systematically to drive digitization deeper in the organization. But if you try to get an organization that's sort of going this way, and you try to sort of jerk it to going that way all at once, it seldom works.
Rita, it's as always a learning experience, and especially thank you because it's so early in the morning that you were dressed to impress. So we appreciate you got up at the crack of dawn. You look as fresh as anything, even though the sun's not even up in New York City yet. Just
starting, and we have snow here, so it's looking very alpine outside, actually. Snow on the trees and everything.
Singapore.
No, you don't.
But on behalf of all of us who have had the pleasure of hearing you speak, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for being one of our board of advisors and helping Antonio and I guide the Institute to what it's now becoming. You've been fantastic on that journey, and you've been an absolute delight to hear today. Thank you very much.
Well, pleasure to see you. Enjoy the conference, and follow up with any questions. If anyone has questions, I'm easy to find, ritamcgrath.com. Pretty easy.
Rita, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rita.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, what's our focus on the conference that Antonio and I have done is we very much didn't want it just to be a webinar where everyone listens and doesn't get a chance to discuss. So what we're going to invite now is each of you to be able to go in to discuss it. So welcome back, everyone. It's such a delight. We started the Institute only 13 months ago, and so many of we've connected, RW, we've been talking recently, and many of you we've been chatting. Great to see you in person and put the face to the names. Yolanda, lovely to see you. Randy, good to see you. Thank you for making it. Okay. Gudrun over there in Iceland, where it's very dark this time of year. So good on you, Gudrun. Thanks. What we're going to do now is we're going to ask from group, we had 10 breakouts, so we'll just go in numerical order 1 to 10. And our objective now is, as an implementation institute, it's not enough just to listen. As our MC, our lovely MC Ricky, who's based in Melbourne, has said at the beginning, we want to make this conference the fuel to start making even more changes as we go forward. And one of those outcomes will be a white paper called The Future of Strategy Implementation that you will all be named contributors on. So the way we're going to first do that is to hear from you. We're going to ask you to share. We have about 25 minutes, so we got about 2 minutes for each leader to share the one key learning that they've taken away from their discussion. We'll go from 1 numerically down to 10. So the leader will share for 2 minutes, then we'll go to the next group. And then by the end of the conference on Wednesday, we'll be able to use your input, your rich content, to then build what we want to see in terms of the white paper that we'll also share with you in its development. And we'll also ask those of you who are willing to also write and contribute to it. But I'll come to that later in the conference. But I'd like to kick off with breakout team 1, if you know who you are. Can I ask the team leader just to put up their hand and go first? Do we have a team 1? Somebody from team 1?
Abdullah, maybe you pick up on that one, please.
Yes, sure. Thank you. Actually, sorry for the delay. I did not know what is the number of our team. So we discussed about main issues. We talked about the knowledge and how we can utilize the knowledge during the inflection point mentioned by Dr. Rita, because there are so many informations out there and data and leading data, and how to utilize it among either the huge enterprises or the small and medium enterprises. Also, we talked about the change and the obstacles with the implementations of the strategy. Sometimes there are constraints. There are some constraints when you want to implement the strategy, outside constraints. For example, the budgeting, limited budgeting, or resistance of the management. So all these could affect the implementation of the strategy. Also, we talked about the I think these are the main points we covered during our discussion.
Okay. Abdullah, Shukran, thank you for sharing. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Good to hear, especially as the first team, never the easiest to go first, so thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'm going to test this one. If we can't remember the group numbers, then I'll just ask people to share randomly. But can we remember who was in team 2? Okay, there's a saying in Scotland that goes, the best laid plans of mice and men gang agaftigly, which in English means the best laid plans of mice and men never go according to plan, which in our field is very much true. So can I just ask for volunteers to share? There we go, Martin, thank you.
So group 8, thank you for not mentioning the rugby, Robin.
You don't know how quiet I'm being.
Yeah, I would like to say thank you to the group, because I think this is a really good collective effort. So we were talking about, when does a leading indicator actually become a leading indicator that is sufficiently compelling that leaders begin to observe it, discuss it, and it's part of the culture that we're willing to accept it. So it becomes sufficiently compelling to become a reason to change or to evolve or to change the strategy? And how do we define when it reaches that point of inflection? And we talked around, how does culture affect that? How does a mixture of different indicators, leading and lagging, it's very easy for people to pick which ones work best for them. But in truth it's very difficult to say that these leading indicators are actually a genuine leading indicator of an inflection point. And I think that was the key thing we were grappling with.
Okay, Martin, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's hard enough to know when you have an inflection point, never mind identify which indicators are valid for that inflection point. Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
Robin, team 4 will go.
Thank you. Joe, thank you.
Tom, Moaz, and I wrestled with a couple of things. The key thing from Rita's presentation, which I think gets lost sometime in the celebration of something new rolling out or following a different inflection point, is that competitive advantage is never forever. And I think that that's the best example that I can think of here in Silicon Valley. Is every time a business gets established and they're rocking and rolling, and pretty soon that kid in the garage next door to you comes up with the next great thing and you're out of business. So one of the things that Tom brought up was that forces the organization to be a continuous and change learning environment, which also says that you got to monitor the environment, you got to do the analysis, collect the data, et cetera. And then we had a good discussion about getting middle management on board with strategy implementation. And we had a great discussion about the various incentives or disincentives that might have to be available. Tom, Moaz, did I miss anything?
No, you're good, Joe. Thanks so much.
Okay,
great. Thank you.
Joe, I'm just personally curious because one of my arguments is middle managers are not focused on enough. Do you have anything to add to the middle managers that you discussed?
Yeah, actually, we talked a lot about while executive suite can get the strategy built for the organization. When it rolls down to the middle management, I think they take this great leap of faith that they're just going to get on board without any continuous follow-up. And we talked a lot about how the strategy management office has to really bear down on the middle managers, delivering the messages on a continuous basis, collecting the data for the objectives that are in their departments and the results, and reporting it out, because it takes them, from our perspective, 2 to 3 years to understand that this is what's really needed, because they're partitioned in a million different directions, but they are the ones that are going to be the result. Their efforts are going to determine whether the strategy is successful or not.
Yeah, fully agree. And one of the key things we have on the course is that they're often called the thermal layer. They absorb from above and below. Yeah, thank you, Joe, for sharing. Appreciate that. Okay. Good to meet you.
Thank you.
Can I ask one of the Randy? Thank you, Randy.
This is team 5. You know, there were several topics that we talked about. They all really kind of centered around what Joe was just referring to, this role of the leader. It's very complex. And so oftentimes the problems that we experience are a function of poor leadership. So some of the things we talked about to really strengthen that role is when it comes to revenue, you know, helping the team understand what are the variables that really can contribute to revenue. And there's where we'll likely find the leading indicators that will help us focus. Trying to roll out new innovations too quickly. Leaders have a role there to kind of hold the team back. You know, we discussed the fact that innovators oftentimes get very excited and are ready to move forward, and that leadership needs to make sure that we're staying focused initially on that minimum viable product. Certainly they have a role to play in removing barriers and creating an environment that enables us to move forward, identifying contributions to the team and building that culture. And then lastly, we came to your concept, Robin, of the thermal layer and how important middle managers are and how they're really getting squeezed today.
Excellent, Randy, and well summarized. Thank you for that. Appreciate the input.
Hi, Robin.
Hey, Carol.
Hi, I'm just speaking off behalf of Team 9.
Thank you,
And we each gave our ideas, and the common theme was being able to identify the indicators in the industry that you are in, and also the importance of leadership and clarity. And in Rita's example of the kite, she talked about the things are communicated. And I think if the message that the leader is kind of given to the company reaches to every individual correctly, efficiently, and also, you know, very in a simple manner, then implementation can be executed a lot more easily. But again, it's about having I like the point that Rita made, that it isn't about the prediction, but it's about preparedness. So there needs to be a team that's always learning about what's happening in the industry so that they can be ready to move and to be agile. And that's one of the points that Rita made as well, having the agility to be adaptable and flexible. Yeah, but the message of leadership, clarity, and always being learning rather being on lagging behind.
Yeah, and being aware of what's happening around you, which is so crucial, even more so we've learned the last 2 years. Carol, lovely summarized. Thank you. Appreciate you sharing.
Robin, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Vish,
No,
looks like Vicky's go first and then yourself. So Gudrun, then Vish. Thanks, Gudrun.
Thank you. We were only 2 in group 3, and we were talking about what Rita was mentioning, the agility or the continuous configuration of strategy execution, and how it's important to try to get everyone involved. It's not only a top-down process, it's a bottom-up process in order to be staying ahead of your competition or evaluating the steady changes in our environment. And if COVID has taught us anything this year, is that you can never foresee the future. You never know what to expect. So you have to get everyone involved all the way from the top to bottom and bottom up. So I don't know if Sylvia would like to add something to that.
Yes, I can add a few more. Like as our discussions, what I like most and touch me most is about agility. About that's also in another term is about the continuous reconfigurations, and also in my our panel discussion that continue to shape your strategy, adapting to the environment, continue to deliver your product and your service based on your customers' essentially a requirement. That's all about that nowadays. What your strategy is not only about how brilliant, how great it can be. It's about what needs and what leads to the customer, and give it to the what customer needs to even so meet to the tiny market niche market area. You really just need to focus on your customer, not the brand campaign, not the best CEO in the world, but about the customer. That's the word.
Sylvia, nicely put. Thank you very much. Okay, we have a couple more lined up. Vish, and then it's going to be Dan. Thank you, Vish.
Good morning, everyone. This is Vish from Group 6. As a team, we all agreed that strategy is all about making the right choices. In fact, making some hard trade-off decisions. Most of the times as a leader, we make a feeling good, and I call it more like a political decisions, which is not good at the strategic level, because we just want to please everybody and make some feeling good kind of decisions. But as a strategic leader, it's not good for the company and company's culture. And then next to it is about taking the right actions, whether it is related to the allocations of resources or allocation of budget or both. We just, that, CIO or CTO might have a pet project, and sometimes we just allocate our resources and money for these pet projects, which is again, not good for the overall organization. And very related to it, Robin and team is, you might have heard about the benefits realization. Main issue is that the benefits are not defined. So if something is not defined, how you're going to measure it? So just like anything else, what is not measured is often not managed, because it's not measured, so you are not managing it, and now you are not realizing benefits. And then for Rita, I think we all agreed the metaphor of kite, which is we all like the string and tail. Basically, a string is like importance of the leadership. You can't jerk it around. It's more like guiding it or steering it. And I think we all agree, as a kid, myself back home, we know how to steer the kite, and you can't jerk it around, otherwise it won't fly. So.
Nicely put, Vish. Thank you. And where are you that you're saying good morning? Where are you?
I'm in St. Louis, Missouri, USA.
Okay, thank you. Good to know where everyone is. Thank you, Vish. Dan, you've been waiting patiently.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm here in Richmond, Virginia. I was part of a fabulous team, which included Anna from the UK, Gurpreet, also from the UK, Faith from Abu Dhabi, and we had Jane join, but we didn't get the chance to verify where she was from. And one of the things that popped out as a team, everyone was really excited and interested about the Gillette story. Clearly, a well-known case, a powerful market leader, and reflections on perhaps their lack of empathy to the customer. As a man, as a student, I did reflect on that buying razor blades was an expensive decision to make. Can you hear me? There's a bit of an echo now. And Faith made a great point that we really need companies. We need to keep an eye on the marketplace and really have good data around decision making. But regardless, we reflected on the R&D investment that was being made. But at the end of the day, did that bring did that enable Gillette to keep its market position? In this case, not. And we all pointed out, and thanks so much to I think Carol just made a great comment, and some of you others, that in many ways the barriers for entry now with direct-to-consumer options have really lowered. And of course, Gillette has been focused on increasing innovation to increase the customer value proposition to keep price high. But a new market entrant came in with a lower priced option, which really disrupted things. That said, they did show agility and they did respond. And I think, to the point of breaking down barriers, Gurpreet made a really great point around how the Porter's 5 forces, perhaps the classic strategic framework, is out of date now. And maybe there is a 6th force. We literally we need to go back and check. And equally, is a reminder of the importance of thinking about the customer value proposition and how that drives strategy. And even with strategy implementation, how can customer value and customer perspectives be embedded within that implementation, which, as we know, when we start implementation, we don't necessarily know the end product, because we have to be in a dynamic interaction with the customer, the end user, if you like. But some other analogies, my own perspectives on the ready-to-eat cereal marketplace, which again is very similar. Very investment in R&D, trying to produce expensive cereal products for clients, but then that was completely disrupted. Very basic organic muesli products. So there are many analogies here, and much for us to learn. So hopefully that's helpful from group 2.
Dan, thank you. But you slipped in something right in the middle that was a trigger that you went straight over, which was that 5 forces is now obsolete.
Well, I don't think we were saying obsolete, but does it need to be refreshed, and are there additional forces at play? And I think is it digital, or is it just that there's R&D, but there's also the need for agility. So it's an organization that can be reactive and adapt rapidly and implement new approaches quickly. So that's tough for me to reflect on because I'm an R&D guy. So does that raise the need just for an agile organization, or do we need to accelerate R&D as well? Yeah. And at the end of the day, as R&D, what are we focused on developing? Have we really thought about the end user and the dynamics of the marketplace?
And if I add on, just I shared with the network an interesting, the balanced scorecard, Kaplan and Norton just published in Harvard an update of their scorecard to include ESG in the whole context of sustainability. And I think, you know, I agree with you, next few years, obviously digital and sustainability are going to very much reconfigure the way we look at implementation. So excellent points, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Thanks so much.
Who have we missed? Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you. Sorry, my apologies. Here we go. Please, Ahmed.
So hello, this is group 10 with George and Annibal from Austria. Annibal from Austria and George from Kenya, and I think, yeah. So we discussed actually the thought of implementing in a big transformation effort, implementing the strategy as a big transformation effort, or better in small steps. That was mentioned in the Rita's presentation. We came up with the idea together that maybe there is no good way, bad way in this case. It depends on the situation. Sometimes we need to have these big efforts, transformation efforts, and sometimes we need to do the small step-by-steps. The problem is, the second item we discussed in this area is who takes the decision actually to go for big transformation or step-by-step. And it is here a question of leadership. So who's going to take it? How the company's leadership is done. So this was, in summary, our discussion about the big transformation that mentioned in the presentation, actually.
And I was hoping you were going to give me an answer, whether it's small or big steps, because it's, you know, the right approach is obviously one of those unanswered questions. There's no right or wrong. It's what works in the culture.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, Shukran, thank you for sharing.
Maybe George or Annibal want to add anything to the discussion? Okay, good. Thank you.
All right, Shukran.
I'll go next, Robin.
Yay, thank you.
Okay,
Good to meet
so I was in the group with Ricardo and Faisal, and two things that we spoke about were Rita's comments about the what we phrased as the Big Bang implementation of digital transformation, where the organization would take on an initiative to change the entire culture, the entire organization at one time, and make it digital. And we felt that that needed to be done with more smaller, quicker wins, as in the illustration she provided about simply automating the sending and receiving of faxes. We also talked about culture, where we had an interesting conversation about a tenure of full-time employees at organizations that tenure is now changing from 20 years to possibly 5-7 years as in this new environment. And looked at whether, we talked about whether that was industry driven, whether that was a demographic of millennials, Generation Z, and we actually left with the desire to talk about that some more and explore that area. Ricardo or Faisal, is there anything you want to add?
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. It's an honor to be with you. Thank you very much for your time to give us some of your knowledge. Nothing to add. I have a very constructive let me say, conversation with the team, and the gain from the constructive conversation with others is also massive. Thank you very much.
I like what you picked up on, that it's the tenure of employees. I mean, we've always talked about the shortening of strategic life cycles, but I don't know if anyone's seen any research that shows, you know, with the reduction in organizations who have gone from like 67 to the average of now 14 years. Has anyone seen research that reflects the average tenure of employees now?
Not for some time, Robin.
Sorry, Emma, please. Hi.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say hi. Pleasure to be with everyone. Not for some time, Robin. I think I saw an article back in Harvard Business Review, going back a few years, it was saying the average tenure was around the 7-year point. So they were looking at kind of the 3 to 5 and saying whether you should be trying to focus some of your efforts and attention. I also wonder with the impact of COVID-19 and employment, how that might affect whether those people that might have looked to move may potentially stay a bit longer in organizations, should they still be there.
Yeah, I think that was a few years ago, if I'm thinking of the same paper. Maybe that's our next area. Could be.
I'm not sure if there is any research. I'm sure there is researches, but we talked, one of the topics we picked up is the lesson learned while we go in our organizations and how the trend goes in different areas in different areas of the world. And we agreed that maybe US is a little bit advanced than others in this aspect, and how the lesson learned out of those knowledge from such people like you go and be implemented in the basis of processes, and those knowledges are much more maybe enhanced in a way. Those guys who are now graduates have knowledge more than the guys are 10 years experience. And we picked up maybe an example of how management before, nobody teach us the management way before 20 or 30 years, where now there are maybe special classes for that, and way previous maybe courses or programs for those before they get into the superior level of an organization. So that's just an example.
Yeah, no, thank you, Faisal. Thank you. Okay. Anyone else we still to hear from? Okay, so we have just a few minutes left. So before I hand over to Antonio, let me say on behalf of all the teams, the discussions, hearing your feedback and your inputs, and also getting to see you all is so wonderful. So thank you for that. And let me hand over to Antonio.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, everybody. It was great. I think the beauty of this format is that the input from Rita leads to great input from the team. I think this is something that I've experienced last year. The community creates so much value, and that's something that we want to build. It's one of our main goals of the Strategy Implementation Institute. It's not just the course or the certification. Of course, these are pillars to bring everybody at the same level, but the community, for me, coming from PMI, where the community has 10,000 people working every day to do a better world, is something that we, Robin and I, want to replicate. And you are the pioneers. So I'm so happy that we managed to put these 3 days together. That is just the beginning of something that we want to do going forward more regularly. And just listening to you, it was as wonderful as listening to Rita, to that level. So thank you very much.
You're a sweet talker, Antonio.
Sorry?
You're a sweet talker.
Not at all, not at all. I think Rita, of course, is at the top, but the difference is not that big. And the sum of the individuals makes bigger than one person, for sure. So it's not at all sweet talk. It's what I believe. That's why we set up this institute, is for the community. So thank you so much. We look forward to see you tomorrow and on Wednesday, which is going to be as exciting as today.
Well, Ricky's going to do the closing for us, Antonio. Should we let Ricky close?
Yeah, I know, Robin. I was passing into Ricky. Ricky, all yours.
Thank you. It's just such a joy to hear your enthusiasm and commitment. And I want to say personally, it's been a fantastic jam-packed 2 hours of knowledge that's been shared so generously. And by everybody showing their vulnerabilities, their challenges and their wins, makes these conversations really important and really real, the things that we can relate to. And as a facilitator too, and MC, you stand apart already as people who are willing to step into that space where it can be sometimes a little discomforting to talk about how hard it can actually be. And I congratulate you, and you are certainly in the right place, and certainly with leaders in strategy implementation with Robin and Antonio. Thank you for your humility, and thank you all too for sharing your intelligence around this important topic, because we learn by listening and we learn by sharing. And I think that's been exemplary today. I can't wait to hear more from the speakers tomorrow and hear more from your voice in order to develop the white paper, and your voice in order to share that white paper with other strategy implementation experts, so the world can develop more strategic alliances and can do better in this important time of our lives. I'm sure the white paper will actually be a treasure trove of brilliant ideas and innovative ways to work. And I personally look forward to sharing that and learning from it. So in closing, a big hand to you, to the audience, for contributing and coming along. A big hand to Professor Rita McGrath for her amazing and insightful presentation. A big shout out to Robin and Antonio for their work and for their commitment in bringing this conference together, because without them, we wouldn't be here sharing all of this beautiful time together. And a big drink of water for me. It's 1 o'clock in the morning, and after all that talking, I don't know how I'm going to get back into the night time, because my brain is already firing up and thinking about all the wonderful things that we can talk about tomorrow. So please be on time tomorrow. Make sure you come curious and excited to be here. Lots of ideas. I want you to, start thinking about implementing already what you've taken away today. Tomorrow, you're going to hear from Professor Tony O'Driscoll from Duke University. It will be a recorded session because timing didn't work out, but there'll be plenty of opportunity to explore his presentation in the same way that we did today. So you will have that gorgeous time. There's a breakout room and you'll have time together to share ideas. Don't keep those ideas secret. Share them with each other. I'm keen to connect with you if you'd like to link in with me. Some of you already sent me notes, and I'll gladly link in with you too. I'd like to be part of your conversation, and I thank you again for your commitment to here. We're finishing on a hard close, exactly on 2 hours. After all, your strategy implementation experts, we wouldn't be doing a good job if we didn't finish on time, would we? On time and on budget, as they say. So good morning, good afternoon, and good night. And I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Have a lovely evening.
Thanks, Ricky. Did a wonderful job. Good night, everyone from Singapore.